The elders of Umuokoro used to say that when a man's shadow begins to walk ahead of him at noon, then something in him has started to hunger for darkness. And that was how the story of Pastor Izinwari began. No one remembered clearly when he first arrived in Umuokoro, a quiet village tucked between the restless river Njaba and a forest so thick that even sunlight entered it with fear. He came dressed in white, always white, his voice soft like evening rain, his eyes bright with what many called the fire of the spirit. He built his church at the edge of the village, where the old shrine of forgotten gods had once stood before. It was abandoned after a mysterious fire many years before. He named it Mountain of Living Fire Ministries. At first, people came out of curiosity. Then they stayed out of wonder, for Pastor Ease performed miracles. The barren conceived. The sick stood up from mats they had slept on for years. The poor began to prosper, and every time a miracle occurred, Pastor Ease would raise his hands to the sky and say, "God has spoken to me. He said I should touch your forehead." And when he touched them, something always changed. The village rejoiced. "God has remembered us," they said. Even the elders who had once distrusted new churches began to attend his services. Offerings grew. The church expanded. Songs of praise filled the air every morning and evening, echoing across the river and into the forest. But not all ears heard joy in those songs. Some heard something else, something hollow, something watching. Among the congregation was a woman named Adais. Adais was not like the others. She was quiet, observant, and carried the kind of wisdom that did not shout. Her mother had been a healer, one who understood herbs, spirits, and the thin line between the living and the unseen. Though Adais had chosen a different path, she had inherited her mother's sensitivity, the ability to feel when something was not right. The first time Pastor Ease touched her forehead, she felt it. Not fire, not peace, but a coldness that crept beneath her skin like a whisper that refused to speak clearly. She went home that day uneasy. That night she dreamed. She stood in the church, but it was empty. The altar was covered in darkness, and behind it stood Pastor Eases. But he was not alone. Shadows moved around him, tall and shifting, their eyes glowing faintly like embers in dying fire. He turned to her and smiled. "Adais," he said, "you see too much." She woke up with a scream. From that day, Adais began to watch. She noticed things others did not. The people Pastor Easy touched most often were the ones who rose quickly, those who gained wealth, influence, or favor. But after some time, they changed. Their laughter became thinner. Their eyes lost depth. Some fell mysteriously ill after months of prosperity. Others withdrew from the village entirely, claiming God had called them elsewhere. And always before their rise, Pastor Easy had touched their foreheads. "I saw a vision," he would say. "God said your glory must come forth." And the people would shout, "Amen." One evening, after a long service filled with singing and prophecy, Adaizi lingered behind. The church emptied slowly, candles flickering as the last worshippers left. She pretended to arrange chairs, her ears alert, her heart beating faster than usual. She heard voices from behind the altar. She moved quietly, her footsteps soft against the floor. Pastor Ease was speaking, but not in the gentle tone he used before the congregation. This voice was different, rough, urgent, almost afraid. "I have given you enough," he said. "The church is growing. What more do you want?" A voice answered him, but it was not human. It sounded like many voices layered together, whispering and echoing at once. "More glory, more souls." Adais froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned closer. "I will bring them," Pastor E said quickly, "but you must not take more than agreed. They are beginning to notice." "Too late," the voice whispered. "The hunger has grown." Suddenly, a heavy silence fell. Adais stepped back, but her foot struck a wooden bench. The sound echoed. Pastor E's turned. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that moment, Adais saw it clearly. There was no light in his eyes, only something deep, something endless, something dark. From that night, Adais's life became a quiet war. Pastor Az began to notice her. During services, his gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. When he prayed, his voice would tighten when her name was mentioned. "Adaiza," he said one Sunday, smiling too widely, "God has revealed something to me about you. Come forward." The congregation watched. Adai's heart pounded, but she stood still. "I am fine where I am," she said calmly. A murmur spread through the church. Pastor Easy's smile did not break, but something behind it shifted. "You must obey the Spirit," he said. "I obey God," Adai replied quietly. The air grew heavy. That day the service ended earlier than usual. What followed was torment. It began with whispers. People in the village started avoiding Adai. Rumors spread that she was stubborn, that she resisted God's work, that she carried a rebellious spirit. Then came the dreams. Dark dreams filled with shadows calling her name. Then came the sickness. Her body weakened without reason. Her strength faded. Sometimes she would wake unable to move, feeling a presence pressing down on her chest. And always, in the distance of her mind, she heard Pastor Easy's voice. "Submit! Submit!" But Adai's did not break. Instead, she went to the oldest man in the village, Papa Nwankwo, a man who had seen more seasons than most trees. She told him everything. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he sighed deeply. "I feared this day would come," he said. "What do you mean?" Adai asked. Papa Nwankwo looked toward the forest. That ground where his church stands. It was never empty. The shrine that burned, it was not destroyed. It was abandoned because what lived there grew too hungry. Adai's blood ran cold. "And now?" she asked. "Now," the old man said, "it has found a new servant." Together they began to uncover the truth. They watched. They listened. They gathered fragments. And slowly a terrible picture formed. Pastor Is was not healing people. He was taking from them. When he touched their foreheads, he was not releasing blessings. He was drawing out their glory, their favor, their spiritual strength, and offering it to the dark force that lived beneath the church. In return, that force gave him power. Power to perform miracles. Power to attract followers. Power to grow his church. But the cost was hidden. Always hidden. The turning point came when one of the church's most devoted members, a young man named Chinedu, collapsed during a service. He had been one of Pastor Easy's greatest testimonies. Once poor, now wealthy, once unknown, now respected. As he lay on the ground, shaking violently, he began to scream. "Give it back!" he cried. "My light! Give it back!" The church fell into chaos. Pastor Ease tried to silence him, placing his hand on Chinedu's forehead. But this time something different happened. Chinedu grabbed his wrist, and in a voice that did not sound like his own, he shouted, "You are a thief of destinies!" The words echoed like thunder. The congregation froze. For the first time, doubt entered their hearts. Adai stepped forward. "This is the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising around her. "This man is not of God. He feeds on you. He takes your glory and offers it to darkness." The church erupted in disbelief, but Papa Nwankwo stood beside her. "And I have seen it," he said. "The signs are clear. This ground is cursed, and he has bound himself to it." Pastor Ease laughed. At first it was soft, then it grew louder and louder, until it no longer sounded like laughter, but something breaking apart. "You think they will believe you?" he said. "Look at them. They need me. They need what I give them." But something had changed. The people were no longer looking at him with blind faith. They were looking with fear. The truth spread like fire in dry grass. More people began to speak. Stories emerged of strange dreams, sudden losses, unexplained emptiness. The illusion cracked. And once it cracked, it could not be repaired. One night, as a storm gathered over Umuokoro, the villagers came together. They went to the church, not with weapons, but with truth, and with voices that refused to be silenced. Pastor Easy stood at the altar as thunder rolled. "You cannot destroy what you do not understand," he warned. But the people stood firm. Adai stepped forward. "This ends tonight." The ground trembled. The wind howled. And from beneath the church something stirred. Something ancient. Something angry. For a moment it seemed as though darkness itself would swallow everything. But then, the old shrine's buried power broke free, not the darkness, but what had once kept it contained. A force older than Pastor Easy's pact, stronger. It rose like a forgotten memory, clashing with the evil beneath the ground. The church walls cracked, the altar split, and Pastor Ease fell to his knees screaming. The darkness he had fed turned on him. "You promised," he gasped. "Never enough," the voices whispered. By morning, the church was gone, collapsed into itself like a story that had reached its end. Pastor Eze was nowhere to be found. Some said he fled into the forest. Others said the darkness took him. No one truly knew. But Umu Okoro changed. The people became wiser, more careful. They learned that not every light is from God, that not every miracle is a blessing, and that sometimes the greatest danger wears the face of faith. As for Ades, she returned to a quiet life, but her name was remembered, not as a rebel, but as the one who saw when others refused to see.